It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I am Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the weekly podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch every Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. Baby, it's cold outside, so let's get into the winter mood with a fun, frosty werewolf mystery. This week, I'm talking about the 2021 film Werewolves Within. Now, what's interesting about this movie is that it is both an adaptation of a video game, but it's also a very well-received video game adaptation. And let's start there, shall we? Video games have become more and more like movies over the last 25 years, while movies have often been maligned by critics for becoming too much like video games in that same stretch. These are both visual media art forms, for sure, but they're also quite separated too. Video games tend to be more immersive, though a really good movie can be too. And movies can be far more diverse in its genres. Video games stick mostly to action, sci-fi, horror, and sports, while movies can be those things and many, many other things. So, yeah, there are differences between the two mediums, but that has not stopped movies from being turned into video games for Nintendo and PlayStation and so on and so forth, and it hasn't stopped anyone from trying to adapt a video game into a movie. Neither have really had a great track history of success. Most early Nintendo adaptations were just flat out awful. But at the same time, we've seen video game after video game, from Resident Evil to Double Dragon to Mortal Kombat to Super Mario Brothers, really kind of badly fail to be worth a damn as a whole. So it's quite something when a movie like Werewolves Within kind of squirts out an 85% on Rotten Tomatoes, being the far and away winner in terms of how critics received this adaptation. Maybe it's the subject matter, maybe it's the cast, maybe it's the comedy, maybe it's that it loosened up the adaptation and made it more successful. But the game Werewolves Within is kind of a Clue-style mystery that is made for virtual reality headset platforms. It's about trying to figure out who the werewolf is among a cast of characters and collecting clues and so forth, and so on, basically. And like I said, it's very Clue-like, or kind of like a murder mystery party style, but in video game format. The main difference, though, is that the game actually takes place in medieval times, and this and has kind of this element of fantasy to it as well. The film version takes place in present day in a small town in Vermont, having been shot in New York's Hudson Valley area near Woodstock. Now, this film does have a relatively low budget of only about $6.5 million, and that was probably prohibitive of costumes and sets for it to be in that medieval setting. It also prevented the use of the U.S. Postal Service logo for one of our lead characters, Cecily, to wear on her uniform. The sad thing is that this movie also suffers from the COVID-19 pandemic. It was early to be released when theaters were just starting to rev back up in the early summer of 2021, but it also released with Fast and Furious 9 and in only about 200 theaters. It did do quite well as a streaming rental, which was how I got to see it the first time. So it didn't make its money back at the box office, but probably made quite a bit from the streaming platforms that rented it in the later part of that summer. And there's a lot of great talent around this movie, too. The script came from Mishna Wolf, who is a humorist and a writer who got quite a bit of attention for her autobiography, I'm Down, which centers around race and her childhood. It was got a little bit of notoriety for being tossed out of a Texas school system for profanity, but it was saved by the school board unanimously voting to keep it in the curriculum. Jesus, how much has changed in the last 10 years since that was up for debate in Texas, huh? But anyway, she has gone on speaking tours at a few colleges, and she's definitely got some writing chops for sure. And our two main stars are Sam Richardson and Milana Weintraub. Richardson is a comedian who's been in about a dozen or more movies and a whole bunch of TV since the early 2010s. He's playing a displaced park ranger named Finn, who is going through a rough breakup and a not so great time, as he's kind of broken some rules, and maybe it's been a little bit affected by his breakup as a park ranger. Now, Weintraub is best known for playing the AT&T cell phone service dealing Lily in just about every other commercial break during a sporting event, particularly during the NCAA tournament season. I actually have seen her play a comedic role in the show Other Space that streamed on Yahoo, and since 2018, she's been the voice of fan favorite character Squirrel Girl in several Marvel Rising shorts. The movie opens with an ominous quote about listening leads to love of ourselves and then our neighbors, and when the quote is attributed to Mr. Rogers, a horror music sting blares, and that should tell you right from the start we're dealing with a comedy. Then we see a man in a snowy wooded area possibly cheating on his wife through text messages. A seemingly unseen force attacks him, and he's dragged into the forest. And about a month later, new park ranger for this small Vermont town, Finn, comes in, and he's clearly going through that rough breakup with his girlfriend. He's listening to self-help tapes to be more assertive, and the message he leaves for his ex sounds fairly desperate. When he gets into town, we meet mail lady Cecily, who is on break at this inn that Finn is going to be staying at. He drops his stuff off and is taken by Cecily to a house on the outskirts of this town to investigate a complaint about someone basically doing like commercial trapping and stuff like that, which is technically kind of falls under his purview as a park ranger. But Cecily explains that she's relatively new to the town herself, having only moved in a few weeks ago. We meet lots of the members of the town, including a gay couple who moved from the city. There's a redneck couple who work at the car shop. The woman who runs the inn is married to the man that we saw at the very beginning. We then meet Trish, and she's played by Michaela Watkins, and she's a bit intense and is basically the local busybody. She also doesn't seem to have a very good handle on social graces by asking Finn if, since he's black and all, if he has a Kwanzaa tree up for the holidays. Trish and her husband are kind of the cartoonish conservative oil-loving capitalists. Supposedly Trish's husband and the redneck mechanic lady have been lovers in the past as well. The main tension in this town is around a proposed oil pipeline that will be built in and around the town. Most do not want this. They basically want to keep the beauty of the town as is and not risk the environmental impact a pipeline could potentially create. As Cecily puts it, the town is mostly against the pipeline, with really the only holdouts being Trish, her husband Pete, and the redneck couple. Finn meets the last of the townspeople, Mr. Flint. Flint is someone who lives outside the town and is very unkind to the idea of there being anyone else on his property. He's scary enough that Cecily will not go with Finn all the way to the front doorstep, despite her having a package that needs to be delivered to Mr. Flint. Now, Flint's kind of your typical mountain man who wears pelts. He's constantly carrying his gun and covers his windows so no one can see in. He is, of course, anti-government. He forces Finn off his property by more or less threatening to shoot him. To make him feel better, Cecily takes Finn to this kind of like a leisure club-like bar that has video games, pinball machines, and axe-throwing targets. And he explains to Cecily that he got reassigned because he basically broke some rules that he shouldn't have basically in his position. And while that was going on, his girlfriend thought that maybe he was a bit quote-unquote too available. and says that a new location would be good for their relationship and that they should keep their options open. In other words, she broke up with him without trying to be mean about it. Just then, it appears Cecily and Finn are going to kiss, and Finn gets a call from his girlfriend, causing Cecily to storm off, telling Finn that he needs to grow some balls. And that's basically what we're going to see as Finn's arc, is him basically, as she put it later, quote-unquote manning up. But that night, Trish, the busybody lady, her dog is attacked and killed. And at the same time, a blizzard has blown in and seemingly taken out the power and blocked roads out of the town. And what's more, there are strange marks, like claw marks, on each of the power generators in town. And while investigating, Finn finds the body of Dave Sherman, the cheating husband of the inn owner, Janine, and his body has been mauled terribly. Now, also staying at the inn is Dr. Jane Ellis, and she's an environmentalist who's basically there to oppose the building of the pipeline. She's taken samples of fur from the end of Trisha's dog's leash and from Dave's body. And with the town basically all gathered at the inn, the town's residents are starting to get a bit restless and begin accusing one another. All the while, personal stuff is happening. Trisha's mad that no one cares about her dog dying. Her husband Pete tries to hit on Cecily at one point in the movie and wants to potentially maybe shack up with the redneck Gwen again. People think Janine maybe killed her husband for cheating on her. The oil pipeline guy, Sam Parker, has a captive audience to try to convince people to sign on for the pipeline construction. Knowing that Flint is an expert hunter, the town would like Finn to go back out to the guy's home and ask him if he would track and kill whatever has caused these deaths. Cecily begrudgingly agrees to go with him, and they find out that Flint's generator has also been messed up. Finn tries to appeal to Flint's sense of neighborly camaraderie by saying that everyone has voted unanimously for Flint to help them. And while Finn and Cecily are at Flint's, the town begins to think that perhaps Flint is the one who sabotaged everything. And at the exact same time, Cecily discovers Trisha's dog's leash on the mountain man's fireplace mantle. Now, Dr. Ellis discovers the samples from the dog's leash and Dave's outfit do indeed match. Ellis concludes the samples resemble a canine, but nothing matches any kind of database. And as night falls, it's determined that everyone should stay at the inn. Now, most everyone assembled has a gun of some sort, so they are pretty well armed, and they are able to lock themselves in their rooms. But while they sleep, something is stalking the hallways. It grabs Pete and drags him down the hallway and bites his hand off. Dr. Ellis does more testing, and it seems that there is something more to her than we know. She knows the killer is a werewolf and is indeed one of the people at the inn. When she refuses to come out of her room, Parker goes into her room, tries to force her out, gunshots are heard, and he says that Dr. Ellis killed herself for fear of whatever is attacking them, or so he says. Now, I mean, he is the guy who wants to build a pipeline, and she was his major opposition to achieving that, so yeah, sure, okay. Anyway, her research has lots of evidence that, yeah, indeed, there is a werewolf, but because of what she said about one of them being the killer, it's turned pretty much everyone against each other. Everyone has a reasonable cause for people to think any other person would be the werewolf. The natives of the town all have some sort of reason to dislike each other, and on top of that, Parker, Finn, and Cecily are relatively new to the town. Now, despite an impassioned speech about togetherness and neighborly spirit by Finn, everyone decides to go their own way instead of staying together in the inn, leaving only Finn, Janine, and Cecily there. In Parker's room, Cecily finds a newspaper clipping about other attacks. A previous series of attacks was at the last place that Finn was stationed. And it seems as though Parker has a map of all the various places where similar attacks have happened. As the evidence against members of Beaverfield, Vermont began to pile up, and motives are revealed, the film begins to close in on the werewolf within the town's population. And since this movie had just come out within the last 8 months or so, I'll not spoil the movie and reveal who it is. It's definitely worth checking out if you like horror comedies. But there is something I won't skip though, and that's my 3 likes for 2021's Werewolves Within. First, I love the setting of this movie. Horror and monsters in snow is already one thing that deserves its own special accommodation here. And then a small town is also something that can be a fun setting for horror. Combine the small remote town with the winter timing, it's almost a perfect setting. And in a lot of ways, it also has that same feeling that John Carpenter's The Thing has. In fact, it borrows one more element from that movie, and that's paranoia. All this, of course, is played for laughs, but as it is revealed that one of the cast is indeed the killer, it begins to bring out all the dirty laundry of the town and base frustrations with each other and, as you would with your neighbors. These are all classic tropes, but when you crank it up to be kind of ridiculous with arch characters and sardonic humor, it just creates a fun atmosphere all around this little werewolf movie. And second, I'll touch upon that comedic script. I find it pretty sharp. While the characters are all archetypes of different types of people you'd find in a specific neighborhood, like you have the busybody, the kindly innkeeper, the evil businessman, the yuppie couple, the weirdo, the white trash, the squeaky clean guy, and the cute mail carrier who kind of seems to always say the right thing at the right time. These are basic types, but they are very well written and directed. I talked about Mishna Wolf having written the script, and as a humorist, you can see that shine through in the dialogue. Also, these characters are very well directed by Josh Rubin, and this was only his second feature film, even though he has done shorts and TV things in the past. He had just come off another relatively well-received horror comedy called Scare Me, and he's really pretty good at working with this cast, and they are all kind of giving really, really good whip-smart deliveries, and it doesn't feel at all like something that decides to devolve into improv or hold on to anything for too long, which is so common in comedy these days. I think it's a really well-timed film. It's not a movie like The Naked Gun or Airplane where you're laughing hard for every second of the movie, but there are perfectly placed large laughs in the midst of a pretty engaging movie that also has some chuckles in it too. It's just an enjoyable watch from beginning to end. Thirdly, Milana Weintraub really just steals this movie. Again, most know her from every other commercial break as the spokesperson from AT&T. She's part of that AT&T Toyota Progressive Insurance trifecta of brunettes selling you things. I actually have seen her in other things, and she's really a very well-trained improv comedian. And in this movie, she's cute, she's funny, she's a legitimate lead opposite another very likable character played by Sam Richardson. She is the perfect opposite as the observant and somewhat cynical, but very likable, non-crazy character in this town. And again, that's playing opposite to Richardson's overly goody-goody, naive ranger. There's not a line that she says that isn't either perfectly timed, well-delivered, or good for at least a chuckle, if not a full-on laugh. She's someone who should be doing more mainstream stuff or larger scale things than she's doing currently outside her commercial work, despite the large number of things she's already done over the past 15 years or so. Well, that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure Podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new articles every Friday morning. When I return with the next Monster Mondays, I'll be taking the first dip into the world of Kolchak, as we first saw him in his first TV movie, The Night Stalker. So until next week, stay spooky.